Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Spiritual Leader. I am your host, Darrin Baldwin, and I am once again with my favorite co-host, Laura, and glad to be back with you. We kicked it off, Laura, last week, kind of a little bit of a fresh start message, starting into 2021, and we just jumped right in there talking about change.
Oh, yeah.
Some people think that might be a cuss word where, as far as you're concerned.
Growth without change is impossible.
That's what we said last week. Pretty awesome. We actually got that. We can't take credit. We got that from a pastor that we just recently met. He said he had that on the front of his church, a big banner. It said, change without growth is... whatever.
Yeah.
Growth without change is impossible. And, man, I think we need to say that a few more times. Growth without change is impossible. Growth without change is impossible. And, if you just look and think about, we could think about our lives, which we'll talk about in a minute, but if you think about where you are right now, you could look back on some, intersections that you came to in your life where
you had a choice.
You had a choice. Don't get me started on that, because everybody will say, well, this was the will of God that I'm in this position. No. You have way more to do with the results of your life than you would admit.
We have a lot of power.
A lot of power. We are very much free will moral agents. And but you may have found yourself at many crossroads in your life where maybe even if you were saved or unsaved, the Lord was possibly directing you into a certain pathway, and maybe you were just resistant, and you really resisted change.
Well, and that segues into what we're going to talk about today, because change many times is uncomfortable.
Oh, it's going to be uncomfortable.
And I think sometimes we'll put on the brakes when we realize that it's getting us out of our comfort zone, or it's becoming uncomfortable to our flesh, or, maybe we don't know all that we need to know at that time. So we're going to have to learn some things that we don't already know. And then we will throw up that phrase, oh, well, this isn't God's will. That's a bunch of hogwash.
I was going to say, our good friend, well, he's one of the ministers that's been ministering here at the church for many, many, many years, Joe McGee. And he has told these stories, and it's kind of really important as it connects to this. He said that in the time he grew up in, his parents, his wife's parents, they all worked at, I think it was DuPont.
Yeah.
Which was, I don't know what they made, paint or plant or tires or something, big plant. And that was a normal part of that culture back then, that you would get a job at one place and you'd work that place your whole life. You would retire with a pretty solid pension, all the benefits that you had in that job. But it's interesting because in recent years, in the last several decades, that stuff has pretty much changed as a whole all over the country. And a lot of those, jobs got shipped overseas, and different technology advanced, and what, people used to do now machines do, and all that stuff. But it's interesting because he said, in the context of change, he said that world doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. So imagine someone that grew up with a mindset that said, I'm going to get a job at the plant, and I'm going to work my whole life, I'm going to build my family, and I'm going to retire with a pension. Well, you may or may not be able to do that, but many people in many of those areas can't do that. Yeah. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to reinvent themselves. They're going to have to change. Yeah. They're going to have to figure out a new pathway because that other one doesn't exist.
Yeah. I would like to say, too, that many times when the Lord is impressing on us to maybe go a certain path or leading us in a certain direction, it will require change. And like we said, change is not always comfortable, but it is necessary.
Oh, Lord.
And if you're going to, Isaiah 1:19 says that, it says, if you want to eat the good of the land, then you have to be willing and obedient.
Oh, Jesus.
So if
you need to say that again.
If you're looking to eat the good of the land, if you're looking to feast on that good stuff that God has for you, then you've got to be willing and obedient. There's something on our part that we have to do. And, we were talking earlier. I remember when I was getting ready, I was finishing my associate's degree at a community college, and I was ready to go on to a state university. I was so excited about that. And the Lord began to deal with me about going out to a Christian college in Oklahoma. Well, that's over 1,000 miles away from where I live. I'm very much connected at home, have deep roots, I had amazing friends. I was really connected in church. And even the thought of moving 1,000 miles away, like I didn't even want to entertain it. I mean, I tried my best to block it out. That can't be God. I've already got it mapped out. My tuition was actually already paid for my last 2 years. It was completely paid for. If I had gone to this other college, I mean, it would have been a pretty penny. But the Lord continued to deal with me, and I was at an intersection, and I had a choice to make. I was either going to continue on my path, the way I wanted to do things, and it would have been comfortable. I'd have been able to come home on the weekends. I would have kept my friends. It would have been comfortable. It would have been familiar. Or I could choose the path that was unfamiliar. It was uncharted territory. I didn't really know anybody out there, didn't know a whole lot about the area, but it was what God had for me to do. And I'm so thankful that I chose to be uncomfortable. And I went out there, and I'll say this too, because that next year was really difficult for me. And it was not all roses. And I didn't just get out there and go, oh, this is amazing. I'm so glad I made this choice. God is with me. Well, God was with me, but it was tough. And I was really miserable that first year out there. It was a struggle, but I knew that's where I was supposed to be. And I'll tell you, in those 2 years that I was out there, I grew tremendously. And God did a work in me. I'll say this too, because I think sometimes people, well, if God's leading me here, or God's leading me to do this, then it's just going to be easy. And that's not always the case. There's probably going to be many moments that are uncomfortable. But if you're willing to embrace that change, and if you're willing to change as you grow, you'll get what you need out of that particular season that you're in. And what was wonderful is after that season ended, I was moved back home where I was comfortable, where I did, I had my connections, my friends, but I am so thankful for those 2 years that I spent in Oklahoma, because growth happened in me that would not have happened here at all.
Wow, that's actually powerful. I didn't make that connection, but I guess our stories are a little bit similar in that regard, that when the Lord called me, I was at Bible college, and the Lord really ministered to me there and said, I want you to go to New Jersey at the time. And I did not want to go to New Jersey.
I can understand why.
I love New Jersey.
Florida girl speaking here.
She's Florida. Yeah, she doesn't really care for the weather, and you have to wait till July to actually swim in the ocean, But I was from New Jersey, but having come down here and lived for a number of years, and really like same story.
Yeah,
I had friends, my life, my job, my career. I had a promising future to work for my brother and his company and do all these different things. Well, the Lord said, go. And I didn't want to go. I did not want to do it, Laura. I'll be honest with you. But I looked this Isaiah 1:19, if you are willing and obedient, you'll eat the good of the land. So anyway, I went, long story short, and the same with you, Laura. God did a tremendous work in me while I was in that place. And he had a supernatural plan. And then we got married within a year after that, or a couple of years after that. And we served there together on staff with a ministry there. And we both remember and look back to that time. What a precious time that God imparted so many supernatural things in us because of that place that we were at. Now, then, interesting enough, I didn't make this connection.
It's important to be in the place.
It is way important, because
more important than you realize.
Well, you get out of the place, you get out from God's supply.
That's it.
And then you're on your own.
That's it.
You're on your own. God can bless you as much as he can. But anyway, I didn't make that connection until you started telling that story, but God did bring me back to Live Oak.
Yeah.
And
So
same as
good.
you.
Yeah.
Same as you. Now, he brought you back sooner than me, but then we ended up working in New Jersey together after we got married. But God brought us both back to here, and then we youth pastored here for 10 years and then became pastors, and now we're stepping into a new phase of ministry. But it's so important. All these things are all going back to that same simple word, and that is change.
Yeah.
And I think if we're unwilling to make, another word we could say is adjustments. Are you willing to make the adjustments?
That's good.
You know, because listen, we could go back and we could say, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah,
and
you
we've done that.
Yeah, and
we've done that in different, sometimes smaller parts. One thing I have never compromised on is the place that God has called me. I've missed it in some smaller areas. And the Lord spoke to me, Laura, in I think around 2000, somewhere around there, and he said, you take care of the little things.
Yeah.
I'll take care of the big things. And I knew in my heart, the big things were, who are you going to marry?
Yep.
Where are you going to be geographically?
Yep.
Most believers have zero concept of this.
Yes.
Geographic positioning, this is GPS, the original GPS.
Yeah.
God's positioning system.
Yeah.
God positions us not where necessarily we want to be. That is
so good.
And this is a huge deal. And we deal with this all the time in 20 years of ministry.
Yeah.
God positions us where not necessarily where we want to be initially, but where he needs us to be.
That's it.
And there's things in that place when he puts us in a place, he needs us to get things from that place.
That's it. Yeah. I
And
was
it's
going to
powerful.
say, when you are willing and obedient, then you allow the Lord to place you where he has called you. And it may just be for a season, you know, and then another season, but the Lord will tell you, all right, it's time.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, we don't get to decide. When we're willing and obedient, then we allow the Lord to move us.
And Laura, as you've described and I've described, that's tough.
It's very tough.
That's tough. And we were talking in the last podcast, everything, there's a time and a season, Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And when you submit your heart to the Lord, you give him permission to direct you where he wants you to go. And without that willingness and obedience, we really short circuit that process of, but again,
how much do we miss out on?
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about the Israelites. They were stiff-necked.
Oh,
they refused. They refused. What do we say? They were unwilling to become uncomfortable.
God.
And so because they were stiff-necked, because they were unwilling to become uncomfortable, they remained in the wilderness. They did not get to partake of the promised land. And God had it for them. He had provided it for them, but they never got to partake.
You just uncovered something powerful. If you read that story, you'll see where the Israelite people who just came out of slavery, they just came out of Egypt, they literally said with their own mouth, we would be better off going back and being slaves. Now listen to these two words, going back. When we are resistant to change. Now listen, I've been here, I know. And this is not a joking matter, this is not a laughing matter. Change is a challenge.
Yes.
I mean, especially big change. Or, you know, when the Lord's trying to get us in a certain direction. But they said those words, it would have been better if we just go back to Egypt. Now, what is that in going back to Egypt? It's going back, you said it earlier, not in this podcast, maybe we were just talking. We go back to what's familiar.
Yep.
To things that we previously, or a direction we were previously headed, or whatever the case is. But there is something so interesting, and I have been there. I have been there where, you know, you watched me struggle for years in ministry, and I would say to you, I'm just going to go back to plumbing.
Yeah.
I used to be a plumber many years ago. I said, I'm just going to go back to plumbing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I probably wore you out all those years, and you probably just were ready to say, God, just go do anything. Just leave me alone. You're wearing me out. You never said that. But the temptation this is so good. When we come to that intersection of change,
it's going to be our first inclination is going to be to go back. Now, every time.
In New Jersey, they have these things that you absolutely hate. They're called jug handles. Yeah. And if you don't know what a jug handle is, see, here in normal places,
Normal.
we have like what's called a traffic turning lane.
Yes.
And I can't figure out for the life of me
They
why
don't have that in New Jersey.
Well, it's not that complicated.
Just
I think
Google them.
This is what happens when an overcomplicated engineer gets in positions of power. They make this thing, you got to go through the traffic light, and then you got to turn around, and then you got to go through the next traffic light, turn around, and it's like it's never-ending jug handles to get back to basically a U-turn.
Yeah.
But I was just seeing that, Laura. Sometimes when we come up to those intersections, we want to take that jug handle and we want to turn ourselves around and go back the other direction.
Yeah.
And it's just, but listen, there is that ability to do a U-turn at an intersection.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There, you can come up to that intersection, and you can look in your rearview mirror, and you can say, man, I think I want to go back to there. Because when you get out into the unknown, when you get out into the areas of change that are very uncomfortable, I love what one minister said years ago, and it always stuck with me. He said, I realize that God moves supernaturally in the areas when I get uncomfortable. And he said, I've gotten addicted to being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
When you get addicted to being uncomfortable, you know you're walking with the Lord.
So good.
So good. But that intersection, we can look back in that rear view mirror because there's comfort back there. There's safety. There's security. But what we don't realize is there's death back there.
There is.
Because we have just given up on moving forward.
Yep.
We did a U-turn and said, I'm going to go back here. This is what I'm familiar with. This is what I'm comfortable with. Isn't that powerful?
Yeah, so
good. But it all goes back to, am I willing to put myself on the hot seat of change?
Yep.
And you and I, we're not, we haven't arrived. But I tell you what we have gotten much better at over the years, and this is all grace, God's grace is in all this. We have gotten pretty good at just putting ourselves in positions where we're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's coming up. We don't know where this thing's going to end up. We don't know if it's going to work, in a lot of different scenarios. But we know that we've heard from God and we're willing to take that step.
Yeah.
And change begins with a step.
Let's end with this, because this is the perfect time, because change begins with a step. Take time. I want to encourage you to take time and write down areas that God has been dealing with you about, or areas you know that you need to make changes in. So take a little time and write down some areas that either God has been dealing with you about, or that you know you need to make changes in.
Or maybe another way to say it is some things that God's been dealing with you about stepping into, right?
That's good.
In a practical way.
Absolutely.
I say this all the time in preaching from the pulpit. I know God deals with people about starting a business. I just know, I sense that in my heart all the time in pastoring. And people are unwilling to take that step. Why? Because they have a comfortable job.
Yeah. It's unknown.
They have a paycheck. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of variables. It's, they don't want to put any hardship on their families. But, we will end with this. This statement I heard years ago was so powerful, and it ministers to me. And it was this: fortune favors the bold. Fortune, or we could say success, wealth, whatever you want to call it. Fortune favors or goes along with or is afforded to those that are bold.
Yeah.
And Joyce Meyer said this, Laura. She said, if you're afraid, do it afraid.
Do it afraid.
Do it afraid.
That's
you
my
don't know
motto.
all the, you don't have all the information.
Do it afraid.
Do it afraid.
There's a lot I do afraid.
Yeah. Laura, I forgot what I was going to say. You just threw me off. Do it afraid. It's true.
Yeah.
But you may not know all the things that lie out ahead of you. But, I can look at, people say success leaves clues. And I can look at some of those great men and women of God, or men and women of God in any industry or ministry, whatever. And every single one of them, Laura, the ministries and organizations that become unwilling to change die.
Yeah.
There's no science about it.
Yeah.
If you're unwilling to change, you're unwilling to grow. If you're unwilling to grow, you're going backwards, and you will soon be in a state of decay and whatever that looks like. So powerful.
Unwillingness to change is an unwillingness to grow. So if you're willing to change, you will grow. Yeah,
it's so good. Well, I hope you got something out of this today. We're going to continue on in this subject next podcast, and we're going to be talking about some more practical things on looking at where we are. Yeah, developing your vision and setting some goals and managing your time. It's going to be really powerful. So until then, we'll see you soon. God bless.